Penn State fans, it's Penn State Oregon week, a bonus week for the Penn State football team. A lot on the line Saturday night in Indianapolis. So we're gonna do another blue white breakdown podcast. I'm Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal with me. We're recording this Thursday morning. It was kind of a crazy week. I know not as crazy as Penn State's, but with letter of intent day and some other things, we had to kind of get some things done. But Johnny, it's time to talk about the game, who we like, why we like them, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in Indianapolis a little bit later in the week.
Very much looking forward to it, Bob. Yeah, we'll all be out there. Me, you, Max, our photographer, Joe Hermit. We'll be in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game, a game that, like I said earlier this week, not a game that any of us expected Penn State would be in, given the Michigan-Ohio State game. Ohio State was 20-point favorites, looking like they were rolling after the Indiana win. But you know what? It's college football, Bob, and things happen.
Yeah,
things happen. And the Nittany Lions are going for their second Big Ten title under James Franklin, first time back since 2016. Just a quick plug before we get into the game. I was able to talk to Joe Moorhead, Jomo, Jason Kabinda, Brandon Bell, a couple of stars on that 2016 defense, reliving that season, that game against Wisconsin, and some really cool stories that I don't think have ever been out there before in terms of behind the scenes in the locker room, the build up to the game. So go check that out on PennLive. That's out now. But a lot of fun talking to those guys, and maybe Penn State will make their own memories this weekend, Bob.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Those are some solid characters, starting with Coach Moorhead, but the other guys, solid players at Penn State. So check that out. Check that out on PennLive. Johnny, before we get to the matchups, one thing I wanted to run by you, this is not a trick question. I know I like to do that to you. So Penn State, they lose to Ohio State early November at home. Sky's falling a little bit. Two good teams. They didn't score an offensive touchdown. Crowd not happy. But Penn State rallied. They won their last 4 games. Here's my question for you. I do put a lot of stock in that win at Minnesota. I do, because of the way that team was playing. That was really their championship game, and Penn State found a way to win it in a difficult environment. But the other 3 games, I don't know how much Penn State gets out of that, but I do think, Johnny, if I was Penn State or a Penn State fan, I think you can hang your hat on that Minnesota win out there, and they had to overcome a lot to win that game. They lost their right tackle, Anthony Donko, in that game. How do you look at the final month of the season after Ohio State for Penn State as far as them maybe getting better?
Yeah, it is an interesting conversation because the level of competition over that final month of the season was not like in years past, in the Big Ten East. When you consider the conversation around this team and the not allowing one loss to turn into 2 and 3, and I think we've both given Penn State credit for the way they refocused after the Ohio State loss, the way that they ran through the final 4 teams on the regular season schedule, as compared to teams of the past, 2017, 2018. Spring to mind of teams that lost to Ohio State and then let it linger. But at the same time, they weren't facing a 9-win team in that stretch. They weren't facing like a 10-win team after Ohio State. So it is worth considering how much that is actually worth. I think it's worth a lot to those guys in the locker room, especially the older guys who have been around for a long time and have seen a lot. To be able to do that regardless of the opposition, because a loss like the Ohio State loss, for as much as that sucked for fans and as pissed off and annoyed as fans were, like James Franklin says it all the time, and it's become a little cliche, but like no one cares about winning more than the guys in the locker room, right? So they take it even harder than anyone else when they lose to Ohio State, especially the way they did. And so I think regardless of the competition, the way that they were able to go out and take care of business, I think is important for the psyche of the team, for the mentality of the team, the belief of the team. And then, when you have confidence, like that breeds itself, that shows on the field. And, I don't know how much better Penn State got over the final month of the season, aside from the Minnesota game in terms of, closing that thing out. But I think confidence wise, it helps a lot.
Yeah. Yep, makes sense. The blue-white breakdown. It is Oregon week. Dan Lanning's Oregon Ducks 12-0 are awaiting Penn State out at Lucas Oil Stadium Saturday night on CBS, 8 o'clock kick. I know there's going to be a lot of Penn State fans that are going to go to that game. They certainly showed out for the 2016 game. Johnny, if this game is half as good as that game, it's going to be must-watch TV. It could be a different kind of game and also be very captivating. But right before we get to the matchups, there's one other thing that kind of slid through the cracks this week a little bit. It's kind of on my mind. I think it's probably on your mind. The All Big Ten voting came out. First, second, third team, honorable mention. And Abdul Carter, absolutely deserving of Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year, first team All Big Ten pick. I think the voters, it was the conference's coaches and media, got it right. I think Dane Brugler has him as his number 3 player on the 2025 draft board and thinks he's going to go somewhere in the top 10. My point is this: they got that right. I'm not sure they got some other things right especially when it came to this Penn State defense. If I was a Penn State defensive player and a good one, I'd be pretty ticked off right now, and I would use that as fuel going into this game. And I know there are players on this team I know that think like that. One of them is Jalen Reed. I know he's told me that. But I just thought, given what this team has done, especially on the defensive side, to just have one first-team pick, only 2 second-team picks, and a third-team pick, and then just to completely ignore Zane Durant in the top 3 teams. I just thought this has been one of the I've seen a lot of these teams. You have too. I think it's one of the bigger hose jobs that Penn State's ever gotten.
Yeah, you mentioned them getting things right. Obviously, Abdul Carter, Defensive Player of the Year, Defensive Lineman of the Year in the Big Ten. 19 and a half tackles for loss speaks for itself, right? 10 sacks speaks for itself. Turn on the tape and it speaks for itself. He's one of the best players in the country, bar none. So deserving there. Tyler Warren being named tight end of the year in the Big Ten. That was a no-brainer. First team All Big Ten. I thought Vengayon, getting second team on the offensive line, I thought was a deserving honor for him. I think he's been their best lineman this year. He's been really good on the interior. The biggest hose job, the biggest what the hell was that, is Zane Durant not landing on any of the 3 All Big Ten teams. Insane. Like that's one of those where you question the coaches because they're supposed to be watching ball.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be watching the tape, every week. And that doesn't make a lick of sense to me because Zane Durant, I think, has been one of the most explosive defensive tackles in the country. He changes so much for that defensive line. And we talk a lot about Abdul Carter opening opportunities for guys. Zane Durant, what he does at defensive tackle opens up opportunities for guys as well on that defensive line. So Jalen Reed has a right, to be he thinks that really from the beginning of the season he wasn't getting enough publicity, and he's mentioned that before.
Absolutely.
He's tweeted about it. He's told us that. And I get it because coming into the year, he was partnered with KJ Winston at safety, and KJ was a projected first-round pick coming into the year by some. And so I think in his mind, the disrespect was starting in July and August. So I understand feeling aggrieved because he's been maybe the most, aside from Abdul Carter, maybe the most indispensable player on Penn State's defense this year. But they I don't know if they need a new system or a new what, but they got some things wrong.
Yeah. I just want to, and I don't want to leave anyone out. Two things you mentioned Venga, that talent and the size of that man, young man, very impressive. But I've also come around. He he's impressed me. There's been a couple games late in the year where he's gotten hurt in the game. You can tell he's dealing with something. He's not 100%, but the guy's tough. He comes out, shakes it off, and comes back in and plays so hard. I've noticed that. I think you've noticed that, and I know that NFL teams are going to notice that. I think Penn State's coaching staff and his teammates notice that. Kudos to him. AJ Harris, third team defensive back, not seeing that at all either. He is one of the top corners in the Big Ten. We don't really get a lot of time. He's not maybe the most outgoing kid, still young, from Georgia, year 1. And Jalen Kimber was good, but AJ Harris, to me, really separated himself, and I think he caused a lot of people a lot of trouble offensive wise. So yeah, I just wanted to get to that with you, Johnny. But now let's pivot. Let's pivot to the big game. Let's just talk about a couple of the things, starting with you before we get to our picks. Whether it's a matchup, a stat, a concern, an injury, when you looked at this game and you made your pick, what really jumped out to you?
Well, we just talked about Abdul Carter and Zane Durant and Penn State's defensive line. They're going up against one of the best offensive lines in college football. Oregon's offensive line is named one of the finalists for the Joe Moore Award given to the top offensive line in football. More specifically, their tackles have been really good. Connerly is a projected first-round pick or maybe a high-end second-round pick. Cornelius on the other side is really good too. And so that's a matchup that I'm really watching for. Can Abdul Carter, Denai Sutton, Zane Durant, and those guys not only apply pressure, but make that pressure count? Because Dylan Gabriel, the veteran lefty who's been in college football for 10 years now, he gets the ball out quick to his wide receivers, Tez Johnson, Holden, Evan Stewart. But he also has a penchant for extending and expanding plays, getting outside the pocket, hurting you with your legs sometimes, but also just firing a dart downfield and making it difficult on those corners to stick with them for a long time. And I think when Abdul and those guys get pressure against an offensive line that's only given up 12 sacks this year, I think, and 43 tackles for loss, which ranks around the top 10 nationally in both categories, they got to make it count.
Yeah, that's going to be compelling. This Oregon offense, we don't get a chance to look at them a lot, but I saw a couple of mid-season breakdowns of them and what they're doing and how they put stress on defenses. And it's not the same as Andy Kotelnicki's, the way that he puts stress. I mean, Andy is so creative with play designs and unorthodox alignments and, putting people in unusual positions. And, he's very, very good at that. And it's hard for defenses to adjust. Also, it's a new thing every week, usually with Andy. With Dan and that offense and that trigger man who is so experienced and those athletes and that offensive line, you can't make any mistakes. And I'm not just talking about physical mistakes, Johnny. I'm talking about mental mistakes. They have a lot of options built into plays. And you could be really good if you defend them for 55 snaps, you could be really good on like 45 or 46 of them. But if you make any mistakes, and it's not just physical mistakes, they're really, really going to hurt you. And to me, that this is going to be a game of stress for both defenses. They're physically talented. They are physically talented, but I think both of them, Johnny, are going to be challenged mentally, maybe more so than at any point this year. And that's one of the things I'm going to be watching is how sound can they be? How consistently sound can both defenses be? Because there's going to be some formations and there's going to be some plays in this game where they're going to try and confuse them. And this is a game where one mistake or two could really matter.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about Oregon's offense, switching to Penn State's offense, and you talk about, confusion and different formations. Big old Tyler Warren, right? The guy is lined up at center and snapped the ball and scored a touchdown receiving. He's lined up at quarterback. He's thrown it. He's kept it. He's handed it off. Obviously, he's the best receiving tight end in college football, like a true tight end. We're not talking Harold Fannin, who is a wide receiver who's called a tight end. Tyler Warren is the best tight end in college football, and Andy Kotelnicki loves to use him in a variety of ways. So, I mean, no defense has faced a Tyler Warren unless you faced him, and Oregon hasn't faced him yet. So, in terms of discipline, in terms of keeping your keys and not allowing a mistake, like that's going to be Andy Kotelnicki's job, right? On Saturday is making this Oregon defense that has a boatload of talent, up front with Uyunglele, Harmon, Birch off the edge, a secondary with Muhammad and everyone else in there that is just incredible. It's going to be if Penn State's going to win, it's going to have to be the Tyler Warren show. And it could be. It absolutely could be.
Yeah, that's the thing when I analyze this game that I'm struggling with the most is I don't know how, as good as Tyler is, as good as Andy is, And as good as Drew is getting the ball to Tyler, even in a tight window, and Tyler doesn't really drop the ball very much. He hasn't had many drops at all this year. I worry about how many people on the Penn State offense in terms of skill players can hurt Oregon. Tyler Warren absolutely can. The problem is Oregon knows it, and Oregon athletically, much like Ohio State, has some people that can really maybe limit what he can do, in my opinion. I think Nick Singleton is a key player in this game just because he's healthier. But Johnny, once you get past those two, I don't know where the third and fourth option is to hurt this Oregon defense. And I think Oregon's got more weapons on offense to maybe give Penn State some problems. So there's still a path to Penn State winning this game for sure. There still is, but I think it's a narrower path than Oregon has.
Sorry, I lost you there, Bob.
All right, what was the last thing you heard?
You said something about a path.
Talk about it. Yeah, that was the last thing I said. So I'll leave them a note. With Penn State and Oregon, they have Penn State's got Tyler Warren and Nick Singleton. I'm not sure who else they had that can really scare Oregon, who's athletically loaded. And I think Oregon's got more options to scare Penn State. So I think Penn State's got a path to winning this game. But I think it's a narrow path than what Oregon has.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Like you mentioned, Nick Singleton healthier now. That's been confirmed over the last couple of weeks, both on the field, watching him, against Maryland and the week before against Minnesota with 100 total scrimmage yards. And then also off the field, talking to James Franklin, talking to his teammates about how Nick Singleton has looked in recent weeks, over the last couple of weeks, really. After taking a beating against Illinois in the Big Ten opener, missing the UCLA game, and then dealing with those bumps and bruises throughout the Big Ten slate, really up until the last couple of games of November. You talk about a narrower path, and I agree, because I do think it comes down to those wide receivers, Bob. Those Penn State wide receivers that have been a question mark throughout the season, and I think when he's been out there, I think Harrison Wallace has done a good job. But is he a true number one? Is he a Tez Johnson type? Is he an Evan Stewart type? I don't know. And I think if Penn State loses, Bob, I think one of us is going to be writing a column after the game about Penn State's biggest weakness coming into the season, costing it in the biggest game so far, at least, of the season. They have the playoffs upcoming, they have all that. But to this point, going against the number one team in the country, this program hasn't beaten the number one team in the AP poll since 1990. So this is a massive, massive opportunity for James Franklin, for Penn State, for the program, for these players. And if they fall short, I think it's going to be because the wide receivers aren't doing enough, aren't creating explosive plays, when on the flip side, Oregon's could definitely do that.
Yeah, and in fairness to the Penn State wide receivers, I mean, they none of them were really ballyhooed recruits. Julian Fleming that was a long time ago, and he's clearly not. He's helped Penn State, but he's just not in that class. He's a good player. He made some big catches against USC. The guy that I'm going to be watching, my one X factor for Penn State, I agree with you on the wideouts. I'm not sure about Wallace. In the 2016 game, Saeed Blacknall went off, and that was one of the differences in Penn State's win. They had Gesicki get a touchdown, and Saquon did his, and Trace did his thing. They don't win that game, I think, without Saeed Blacknall's contributions. Penn State's going to need that from one of these wideouts. Saeed didn't really do a lot, other than that game. For me, the guy is Amari Evans. He's got the deep speed. The last two games, he's feeling a little frisky. He can certainly run by you if you mess up. I think just his speed alone makes him a guy in the receiving corps that I would be watching. He might not have the most polished route tree, but I think if he can deliver one or two explosive plays, that could be enough with Tyler and Drew and the defense and Nick. But they're going to need one of those guys to do something like that.
Sorry, I got where you said they're going to need one.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's just you're fuzzy. I'm sure I'm fuzzy to you, but there's not a lot we can do. I mean, I mean, why don't we just go? I'm just going to say after 15 minutes, good luck editing this thing. There's nothing we can do about it. But as long let's not make any more mistakes. I'll just say we were going to give our picks at 21 minutes, but from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, it was we were a handful today. But we're not going to be able to fix this, and we're out of time. All right,
Yeah.
Johnny McGonigal, it's time to make our picks for the game. Who do you like and who covers?
Well, what's the spread right now, Bob? I haven't checked this morning. Is it 4.5?
It's 3.5. It's on Thursday. It's been pretty much 3.5, 3.5, 3.5, and 49.
3.5. I'm going to take Oregon to cover because I've got Oregon winning 31-27. So barely. That's why I asked about the hook or even about that extra point. Because I've seen it, it opened at 3.5. I think a few hours after the game, when we were driving away from Beaver Stadium, me, you, and Ryan Snyder and Greg Pickle, it moved from 3.5 to 4.5. So that's why I asked. But I've got an Oregon win by 4. I think it's going to be a tight game. I think Penn State can certainly win it. Like they can certainly in this. So, I mean, Penn State is actually considered the slight favorite by ESPN's metrics. They give them a 51% chance to win. So it's basically a coin flip. That's how I see this game. But I just think what we talked about with the wide receivers. And if I'm wrong, if Amari Evans has a Saeed Blacknall game, credit to him, and I'll put my hand up and say I'm wrong. But I think in a game with the difference in talent at wide receiver that big, at least from my perspective, I think that's what's going to swing the game in Oregon's favor. Oregon 31-27.
Yeah, I got a little bit lower scoring, even though there's a lot of athletes on that field. I think the defenses are really good, and I think you will see some plays. But when they make big plays, they're going to be confused. They won't be out athleted. 24-20 Oregon. Penn State's come a long way this year. I love their defense. I think they're playing the best team in the country. I think they're playing the team that's going to win it all. But I do think that Penn State will give it all they got. I just don't think they have enough on offense to beat this team.
More than fair. More than fair.
All right, guys, that's it for this blue-white breakdown. Johnny, great talking with you. We had a couple technical difficulties on this podcast. Hopefully, we're going to get them cleaned up. Enjoy the game, guys. We've been wrong before, but no matter what, Penn State's not done playing football. We'll be talking about Penn State's place in the playoff and the result of this Oregon game, I think, after the game and all next week.
Did you hit stop?
Johnny? Not yet. I couldn't tell if you were frozen.
Oh, no. I was just waiting for you to hit stop.